Hello, this is John Maggiore with MaggioriOnBowie.com. This is the MaggioriOnBowie.com YouTube channel that has a weekly interview that has something to do with David Bowie. And for daily updates, daily new content, visit the blog, www.MaggioriOnBowie.com. Today, I am very, very excited to have a very special guest joining me, Mark Wardel. I think everybody knows Mark Wardel, and if you don't, you know his art. And if you don't know his art, you're going to really be in for a treat today because it's wonderful. Mark, I'm going to introduce him as if you don't know him, but I think you do. So Mark is an acclaimed figurative painter whose work explores themes of identity, particularly the self-created personas adopted by outsiders such as David Bowie to navigate society. Also known as Trademark, Mark has showcased his art in galleries and museums around the world. His distinctive pieces are part of notable collections owned by figures including Bowie. He resides and works in London. He merges influences from classical portraiture, post-punk graphics, 70s and 80s New York street art, and pop art. And I'll just mention, as I became more familiar with his art, I first saw some similarities with Andy Warhol, which I think you're going to see. But the more I think about it, there's an interpretation of Warhol that he is making a cynical commentary on society and that his art is somewhat detached. Whereas I feel like Mark's art is brimming with life and has an earnestness and just a joy to it that I think is a little different than what Warhol was going at. But maybe Mark disagrees. We get to hear from him. That's the great thing about this interview. So his art has graced the covers of magazines, major club campaigns, I believe record covers. I think we're going to look at a couple of those. His clients and collectors range from Defected Records and the V&A Museum, which just last week, as of when we're recording this, announced that they're going to be opening up their major Bowie collection next year in 2025. And iconic artists have collected his art. And you're going to want to collect his art after you see this, if you don't already. So Mark, thank you very much for joining me today.
I'm honored, John. Thank you for that intro. It's made me sound really great.
Well, you are. So.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, we try. We try.
So I'm starting with this image, and I'm going to ask you about the image behind you, but not right away. This is obviously you with one of your Bowie portraits. But before we get into Bowie, I was going to ask you about. I mentioned Andy Warhol, and what is the story behind this shirt?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I discovered Andy Warhol through David Bowie, as I discovered really most of the things that I wanted to know when I was at school through David Bowie. It was stuff I wasn't learning at school. So I heard about Andy Warhol, Burroughs, Jean Genet, all these different people. By 86, I was, of course, living in London and working in London. And Warhol came to town for what turned out to be his final exhibition of his self-portraits, which I went along to wearing this T-shirt that I painted. I was selling them through shops in London, Paul Smith. To my surprise, Andy Warhol, who I thought never said a word, really started chatting to me, wanted to know all about the T-shirts, wanted to know, are you an artist, and all this, that, and the other. And he signed my T-shirt for me, and he commissioned me to paint him a copy of this T-shirt. So, of course, I went away on cloud nine, stayed up all night, painted him a T-shirt, and delivered it the next day to the Ritz Hotel where he was staying. And then a day after that, I was actually living with someone who lived near the Ritz. And the day after that, I saw Andy Warhol in the street and went up to him and said hello. And he thanked me for the T-shirt and everything and took some photos of me. And I kind of said, I'd like to come to New York and work with you and all of that. And he said, oh, well, we'll try and work something out. But of course, sadly, a couple of months after that, he died. So that didn't happen. But I'm thrilled. I mean, my two greatest treasures are my signed Andy Warhol T-shirt that I painted, and my letter that David Bowie wrote me from Berlin in '79. So they're the two things that I would say from fire, you know, from proverbial fire.
So how early were you in your career at that point? Because I would imagine that exchange that you just described as being as close to an objective message that you've chosen the right thing to do with your life.
It was, yeah. I mean, you know, I'd been in London since '78, and I had by then I'd kind of established myself on a certain scene, basically the club and music scene. I was doing a lot of artworks around. I mean, my artwork has always been, the context of my art has always been naturally gravitated towards the club world and the music world, because they're arenas in which exhibitionists and voyeurs kind of coexist. And it's an arena where people can reinvent themselves and do reinvent themselves as alternative personas, which all goes back to the Bowie thing. So by that point, I was kind of well-known-ish on a certain scene, and I was secure. I was confident in what I was doing, but having Andy Warhol admire my work and even, you know, commissioning me to paint him something was just, you know, along with meeting Bowie in '79 and the letter, they were the two. They were the two real pieces of validation and two moments in my life that I just, if you told me that in 1972 or '3 or '4, that these things were going to happen, I would never have believed it. No, it was incredible. I'm very, very lucky, really, to, you know, for a lot of the things that have happened. It's all been luck.
I don't know, that's all been luck, but so we're going to jump ahead from the '80s to the '90s. Well, not the '90s, to the maybe about 2013, and show some images that got international attention. And so let me ask you this: as I'm showing these images, obviously that's David Bowie. Are these death masks?
No, they're you've seen Cracked Actor, the documentary.
Yes.
And you see him having a face cast made.
Yeah.
I got hold of a cast that was made for a friend of mine who was a bigwig at EMI Records, and back in the '90s, he got hold of a cast that had been taken from the Cracked Actor cast, and he lent it to me to make a copy from. It was kind of rough, so what I did was I cast one, and then I kind of smoothed it off, preserving the features, but just building it up a bit at the sides and everything to give it more of a pleasing aesthetic, and kind of leveling off the head a bit and all of that. And I just started making them for myself, just for fun, you know. And what happened was the V&A saw them in 2013 and asked me if I would make them an edition of silver ones to as part of the David Bowie's exhibition, which kind of exploded the masks. Bowie saw them, and his personal assistant from New York phoned me on Christmas Eve in, I think, 2015 Christmas Eve or 2014 Christmas Eve. And in 2014 Christmas Eve, I got an email. Sorry, not a phone call. I got an email from Eileen Darcy from iSolar saying that, you know, they would like to buy 2 of the masks for inclusion in the official David Bowie archive. So that was kind of an amazing Christmas present that I really didn't expect. And since then, they got a lot of attention, you know, and they got quite a lot of press. And I sort of became accidentally. I never meant to be known as a mask maker.
No. Yeah.
It was just an offshoot of my obsession that kind of accidentally got out into the public, so to speak.
Yeah. So this was part of or not this particular mask, but some of your masks were part of, you mentioned it in passing, the David Bowie Is exhibit, which was touring the world in 2013. I think it ended in 2014. Were the masks part of all the exhibits, or was it just in London?
No, they weren't actually part of the exhibit. They were being sold as part of the
I
merchandise
see. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the shop, in the gift shop, along with all the records and things like that.
Yeah.
So they weren't actually in the exhibition. They were just part of it for, and they were only for London because they sold out. I did when I showed them, when they saw the mask and they said they might order 50. And I thought, because I'd never made more than one or two at a time, and I thought, God, how am I going to make 50? You know, this is going to be. So I went away and kind of, refined my technique a bit. And when the order came through, it was for 300.
Yeah.
And so I was quite busy for a while, and they actually sold out, and they didn't commission anymore because they were a limited edition. So once the 300 of the silver ones were sold, that was it. There was no more. So they never. I don't think they didn't go. They didn't sell them at any of the other touring exhibitions. It was just for London,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you, I think that this is, in my opinion, that the masks are resonant in part because of how Bowie employed both literal and metaphorical masks.
Mm.
But before I ask you that, I want to advance to, you have some non-Bowie masks.
Yeah.
And yeah,
mm.
I didn't
Yeah.
cut you off.
Sorry. Yeah, basically, well, obviously through the Blitz Club and the London club scene, I knew and know Boy George and Steve Strange. This one is actually a life mask of Steve Strange. And George and Steve were, like everybody at the Blitz, they were massive Bowie fans,
Yeah.
And obviously Steve Strange was in the Ashes to Ashes video, this is the makeup, the one that you're showing now. This is the Ashes to Ashes makeup that I did on his mask. So they both basically asked me to make live casts of them, which I was happy to do. So this is a live cast of Steve. The other one you showed, which I did a Lee Bowery makeup on. No, that's Steve as well. Sorry, that's the Ashes to Ashes. This one is, yeah, that's the Ashes to Ashes. This is Boy George as Lee Bowery, but it's a cast I took from Boy George's face.
Yeah.
The interesting story about the Steve Strange mask is that Steve came round to have it taken the day before he was going on holiday to Egypt. And I'd rushed it, and it didn't really come out too well. There were a few holes in it, and it was a bit rough and everything. So we'd kind of said, look, when you come back from Egypt, I'll redo it. We'll do it again. And of course, Steve never came back. And after he left, I almost threw the one that I'd made away in the trash, in the rubbish, thinking that he would come back and we'd do it again. And something at the last moment just said, no, don't throw it away.
Yeah.
And if I'd thrown it away, there would have been absolutely no live cast of Steve Strange at all.
Wow. So before we go on, I think I know who Steve Strange is, and I know what the Blitz Club was, but I don't assume that everybody does. Why don't you explain what was the Blitz Club, who was Steve Strange, and what was Bowie's connection?
Okay. The Blitz Club was it was a one-nighter in 1979 in London. What happened at that point in Britain at that time? There were a lot of Bowie nights. Discos and clubs were doing Bowie nights, and they were playing Bowie and Roxy music. Now, a guy who'd been a punk in Wales and had come to live in London called Steve Strange, and his partner Rusty Egan, who was a DJ and musician, they were doing a Bowie night at a club called Billy's in Soho, which was quite a small venue, and it became so popular they had to move it. And they moved it to a wine bar in just off Covent Garden called Blitz, and did a Tuesday night, which was like a Bowie night. I don't think they called it a Bowie night by then. And it was basically, it was a night where art students, Bowie fans and people could go and express themselves, their personas. All these kids were mad Bowie fans, and they were taking it all a stage further by, instead of just dressing up as Bowie, they were recreating themselves in new personas. So people like Boy George, you know, when I first met George, he had a yellow face with different color makeup. His hair was a foot high. He had like a kimono on. He had parrots in his hair. You know, these people were the most incredible looking people you'd ever seen. And immediately, when I saw them in '79, I realized these are going to be the subject of my art, because they just looked incredible. Steve had a different look every week. You know, he would change his image every single week. No one could keep up with him. Now Bowie knew what was going on all the time. I mean, you've never heard of someone who was so in tune with every single fashion movement or music movement or whatever. So obviously he knew about the Blitz Club, and he obviously knew that all these kids were inspired by his ethos of you can reinvent yourself as whatever you want to be. And very cleverly, he kind of, it was like a circuit that fed into itself. These kids were inspired by Bowie, and then Bowie was kind of inspired by what they were doing and co-opted them back into what he was doing.
Yeah.
So it all resonated at the right time. And he came to the Blitz one night, and he asked Steve to be in the video, and he got Steve to choose, I think, 3 or 4 other people who were going to be in the video with him. And they all thought they were going to be flown off to the Bahamas or something, like Duran Duran, you know. And they ended up on a freezing cold beach in Hastings, you know, walking in front of a bulldozer.
Yeah.
It was, so that was kind of when the whole Blitz thing exploded. I think Bowie kind of gave it kind of a legitimacy, and it sort of went nationwide, and it sparked off this kind of fashion that became known as New Romantics, and sparked off a lot of groups were inspired by it, in the way that a lot of groups, you know, were also inspired by Bowie. They're also inspired by the people who were inspired by Bowie.
Yeah.
But it's interesting the way Bowie's influence kind of rolls on in that kind of onward sort of fashion, and is still doing it to this day.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's become such a legendary part of the story, but also as you mentioned, the fashion influences, you know, continue. And I asked you to explain what is the Blitz Club, because I think that there's people I happen to be talking to from New York City today, and there are people walking down the street that were influenced from this and have no idea. Oh,
yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, that whole kind of period is kind of, you know, in London as well. You know, a lot of these young art student kids are kind of doing nights now, and dressing and doing makeup in this kind of thing. You know, I mean, I've been around a long time, and I'm, you know, a lot older. But when these kids meet you and they hear that you were at the Blitz and you know, you knew these people and whatever, they can't believe it, and they're so
yeah.
interested. They're so interested in it. It's still, because it was a reaction against the grey kind of, the violence of punk and the nihilism of punk, and the grey sort of greyness of life in Britain at that time.
Yeah.
It was like a Hollywood, it was kind of like doing something. It was like, in a way, that in the 1930s in America, Hollywood musicals were really popular. It was escapism. These kids were escaping out of their dole queue and, you know, joblessness, and they had no, you know, it was all done on a shoestring and no money at all. They could all live in central London because they lived in empty buildings, in squats. You know, you could never do it now.
Yeah.
And because they could all live in central London, it meant they could set these nightclubs up with basically no money. They didn't have to travel far to go home. They could walk home, basically. I mean, I remember Boy George walking down Charing Cross Road and cars nearly crashing because these people looked like that in the day. They weren't dressing up for the night. They actually looked like that all the time. It was quite funny.
Yeah. So let's go back to the masks.
Mm.
I, I was starting to say that I think, especially the Bowie masks, but really all of these characters, and the concept of a mask, I think, is resonant because, like you were saying, Boy George is walking down the street dressed the same way that he was dressing at the club. They're using masks in a way themselves. And so the metaphor, what do you think that the mask is speaking to?
Well, we all wear masks, I
Yeah.
mean, all the time. So there's kind of physical masks and there's metaphysical masks. And I think the Bowie ones resonate because, as you say, he was performing as characters and was basically using cosmetics and styling to create these characters. So they were, in effect, masks. I mean, the one you're showing now, which is kind of my recreation of the Hammersmith Odeon final Ziggy Stardust
Yeah.
concert, is that's a mask. And when you see him on the stage, his face looks like a mask in motion because he had such extraordinary bone structure. I mean, as an artist, I am a massive fan of bone structures. And Bowie was so thin that you could actually see his bone structure. And he had such fantastic bone structure that being thin created this amazing look whereby makeup on top of it really accentuated all of that. And you look at a lot of photos of Bowie from that era, especially the sort of Aladdin Sane, Ziggy Stardust era, he doesn't look like a real person.
Right.
You know, you think that, I mean, I remember the first time I saw a picture of Ziggy Stardust in kind of 1972, before I'd seen him on TV. I just thought, I can't believe that another human, but that a human being could look so beautiful and so cool and so kind of futuristic and unlike anyone else you'd ever seen. It just made such an impact. And
Yeah.
it's masked, so the whole thing of playing with the masks is it's so interesting because it's all part of the same thing. It all feeds back into the same thing. I find it quite strange. And I mean, I'm flattered that some people find them too creepy because they feel that they kind of look like, the eyes are going to open or something. So it's a strange thing. And the other thing is, because I've been working with these masks so much ever since sort of the 90s really. I know every tiny quirk of Bowie's physiognomy. I can
Yeah.
tell you the most minute things, like his right cheekbone is slightly higher than his left cheekbone slightly bigger than his right. Things like that. Things about the tip of his nose bending very slightly to one. It's not really healthy. I know more about his face than I know about my own.
So we're going to move from the masks to something that you mentioned before, which is this letter. And this is the letter that Bowie sent you. And, it's up on the screen, but I'm not sure that everybody could really read it. What's the story behind the letter?
In '78, I started hanging out with these girls who were David Bowie fans. One day they said to me, "Oh, David Bowie's doing a radio interview at Capital Radio, and we're all going to go up and hang out and see if we can meet him. Why don't you come along? And why don't you bring some of your artwork?" So I said, I went along and I brought the Cracked Actor artwork I'd made at art school, attached a sort of fan letter to it saying, you've always turned us on to all these new things and it's kind of, sort of books and films and things like that. So we got outside the Capital Radio building, and there was a lot of fans out there. It was like a riot in the street, and these girls knew they recognized this lady called Barbara DeWitt, who was an American lady who was David Bowie's PR lady. She was over by his limo. So they said, oh, come on, let's go and show Barbara this picture. So we went over, I showed Barbara the picture. She said, wow, that's really great. She said, do you really want David Bowie to have it? And I said, yes. She said, well, he's not going to come out because, you know, it would cause too much of a riot. You know, there's too many people here. She said, but if you really want, she said, I'll put it in the boot of the car and I'll make sure that he gets it. Of course, I said, yes, you know, please do. And she went away and put it in the car. And I kind of forgot about it. And about 6 months, 5 or 6 months later at work, because I put my work address, because I'd only recently come to London and was moving about, I put my work address in Soho. And they said, oh, there's a letter coming for you from Berlin. And I thought, oh, I don't know anybody in Berlin. And I didn't recognize his handwriting because I kind of never thought that it would be him. And I opened the letter and it's a letter from Bowie thanking me for the picture and recommending these books that I should read and saying, and they are scary titles. It's The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, and Brain of the Firm. Those are the two books that he said I should read, which I did eventually. And I just couldn't believe it because he's handwritten the envelope and presumably licked the stamp and everything. And from Berlin, I just thought, I can't believe that David Bowie sat in Berlin, presumably in his flat or something, and wrote a letter to me and wrote the envelope. And I still can't really compute. But the interesting coda to the story is, by September that year, I was living with someone who owns a nightclub called Legends in Mayfair, which David Bowie frequented at that time. And one night, the manager said, David Bowie's in the club, and I've told him that you're a massive fan of his. And he said that, you know, if you come over, he'll, you know, you can meet him. So I was led down to the mezzanine. He was at this quite discreet table with Coco Schwab, his personal assistant, and another person, I can't remember who it was. And I was introduced to him, and he got up and he shook my hand and we stood face to face talking. And I said, oh, by the way, you wrote me a letter. And he said, did I? And I said, yes, from Berlin. And I told him, and he said, God, is that you? And I said, yeah. He said, oh, I can't, you know, I can't believe it. You know, it's really great. And we were talking, and I had like bleached up hair and a blue rockabilly suit and everything. And he turned to Coco and said, that's a really cool look and everything. And I just thought, I cannot believe you know, I just can't believe it. My one regret is that I didn't get a photo with him at that time. You know, there was nobody around that had a camera. It wasn't like now where, you know,
bust out the phone,
toilet, and there's 100 photos being taken. Yeah. So that was another completely just, you know, I've met my two greatest heroes really, and interacted with them, and they've liked my work, and they've either commissioned me to do something or they've written me a letter from Berlin. It's just, you know, it's, as I said, it's just pure luck, really. I mean, it's such a lucky thing to have happened.
That's really amazing story. Yeah, wow. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of asking what the books were about, but just very briefly.
Well, the thing is, Bowie asked me if I'd read the books when I met him, and I hadn't. And I can't remember whether I told the truth or whether I lied. I said, hopefully I told the truth, because he could quite likely have asked me something. The Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind is, as he said, it's a scary title, don't be put off by that. I was put off by that. I didn't read it for a few years after that. I don't think I was mature enough at that time. It's a very, I think he must have read it while he was on coke. You know, it's a very kind of, it's a theory of how back in ancient times, mankind didn't have individual thought. we were all connected, or we were connected by telepathy. And there's something about the Trojan Wars were fought on the energy of telepathy. It's all that kind of stuff. It's very. I might have to reread it actually, because I still didn't really quite understand it. He obviously did.
So that, you know, it reminds me of the opening lines of what is it? Up the Hill Backwards.
Mm.
And it also sounds sort of Jungian, which she was into. But anyway, let's move on from that. So I think, I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong. Are these images that we're looking at now, were they used? And there's the backdrop that you're in front of right now. Were these used in the last year's World Fan Convention?
This year's
this year's, yes.
Yeah. Back in July.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the theme was the Year of the Diamond Dogs, which is my absolute favorite Bowie album. It's my favorite Bowie period, that whole 74 to sort of 76. I mean, I was a massive Ziggy Stardust fan in 72, but I got to like him and be more and more immersed in everything by that time. And so to create a visual identity, I decided I've always adored that stage set, the Diamond Dogs stage set. It's just been fascinating. And because we never got it here in Britain, and it never went anywhere outside of America, I just thought it would be fun to kind of do a kind of smaller scale, obviously, a smaller scale kind of recreation of it for the staging of the convention. And it actually worked quite well. I mean, I think it kind of gave it a bit of the flavor of that sort of era. And likewise, the cutout figures. They were just really, I was just having fun, really, because normally I paint on canvas and everything. I'd never really sort of done cutout figures before, and kind of got quite into it. So I thought, well, these would be quite perfect to dot around the venue basically for photo opportunities, so that the fans could actually have something interesting behind them for photographs rather than just, you know, a bare wall, you know.
Right.
And it worked out really well. And everybody seemed to really like them. So yeah, it was a blast.
So the original stage design that you based this off of, as you alluded to, was used in the initial stages of the Diamond Dogs tour. And that's, you know, the Hunger City set, which was, as you're saying, it was much larger. And at the time, it was the most elaborate stage set in rock and roll history. I talked to Tony Zanetta, who was involved with that tour and involved with the stage setup. And I asked him, I was like, you know, would there be a Taylor Swift's Eras tour if there wasn't a Diamond Dogs tour? And he was modest, but you know, the scale and the stagecraft of that initial tour, was there anything like it before? I don't think that there was.
No, I think that was the first, and I think it led on to a lot of things like the Jacksons, because Michael Jackson. By the way, I know Tony Zanetta. He's a fantastic guy. And he was very helpful, because myself and Susan Compo, an American writer, we wrote a book about Cracked Actor, and which I illustrated. And I spoke to Tony Zanetta, and I had a thing where we would talk every Saturday, just chat about all kinds of stuff. But I interviewed Tony for the book, and he was very helpful. But yeah, back to what you were saying. No, I think that was very influential. I think that's and Michael Jackson attended the Diamond Dogs shows in Los Angeles, and apparently asked Bowie lots of questions about it. And actually, you can see the influence. The Jacksons started to do these big production tours. Obviously, technology had evolved a bit by then, so it wasn't quite so, you know, cardboard cutouts. But you could even see Michael Jackson copped some of Bowie's style at the time with the fedoras and the braces and everything, which he kind of used, he sort of carried on with forevermore, really. I mean, that sort of became his look. And the moonwalk thing, I mean, Bowie did that in the Diamond Dogs, going backwards, which you see in Cracked Actor when you see, I think it's Aladdin Sane, or yeah, I think it's Aladdin Sane, he does it.
Yeah.
And so you can see the influence on the Jacksons, and I think their tour obviously has an influence on other people. So, like everything, the influence of Bowie rolls onwards. Rolls onwards and onwards, and it's still running on today.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the original design that you're working off of was influenced by German expressionism, and there's a particular artist, George Graz. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing his name, who was had become a critic of Nazism, and Bowie and Diamond Dogs is really originally based on 1984, and it's a commentary art on authoritarianism or totalitarianism. So how are you using? I'm saying you, but Bowie too, the set design, the theme to help sort of underscore that message, even to people that are not necessarily familiar with German expressionism.
Mm. Well, I think it's also very heavily influenced by a film called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah, yeah.
Those German expressionist films where the buildings were all, to create a nightmarish, the whole effect of German expressionism was kind of created a slightly nightmarish, dreamlike thing. So buildings are all at strange angles, and a lot of it is all painted and flats, like theatrical flats, painted buildings painted on flats. Now, I think there was also some of the ideas of Metropolis were in there, and George Gross, as you say, I think it was a whole, as with Bowie, I think he took in a lot of influences and kind of amalgamated them all into his own sort of thing, which is what all artists do. It's what I do. It's what most people do. You take in information, you process it, and then you filter it through your own aesthetic, and you put it out again. He was obviously very into the theatricalization of power and totalitarianism and everything. And the whole Diamond Dogs thing was very apocalyptic and everything. So it was, I think it was just really to create I think it was really to create a mood, and apparently it did. Especially in the smaller theatres, when you saw it, and I think they had smoke and everything, and they had. I've actually got a tape of the sound effects that they played for about 20 minutes before the show starts, which is kind of howling dogs, wind, rain, and stuff like that. So it must have really, had a powerful. It wasn't just kind of like a backdrop. It must have had a powerful effect on the whole mood of the concert, which was obviously he was trying to put across his feelings and his ideas.
Yeah, it was like a character itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so I was thinking about how to end this presentation, and I was thinking about I take it that's a self-portrait.
No, it's not. I wish
it. Yeah.
I wish I did look as good as that. No, that was taken from a club flyer that I did. Again, it's completely invented, but it's based on the wig is based on on Andy Warhol's wig, obviously.
Yeah.
The face is invented, and if you look carefully, the neck and the shoulders are from Aladdin Sane.
Aladdin Sane. Wow, I did not notice that. Wow. Yeah, well, anyway, I wasn't going to end on this, so I was going to end on this. So, so Mark, you've been so generous with your time. This has been wonderful, and I feel like I could talk with you all day. But I will sort of end with asking you a question that I ask everybody, and it's the most superficial of questions that I can ask. Well, I'm going to ask you two because I'll start with this. What's your
Can I
favorite Bowie
can I-
song and your favorite Bowie album?
Okay. My favorite song is All the Young Dudes,
Yeah,
but the Mott the Hoople version, which I kind of see as a Bowie version because
yes,
he's on it and everything.
yeah,
That record I bought in 1972, it almost made me cry then. I don't know why, because it's about, it kind of has an elegiac, kind of lost youth kind of feeling, and I was only
yeah,
14 at the time. And it still has the same effect now. I love it. My favorite Bowie album is Diamond Dogs,
yeah.
and also, of course, I love David Live. This was the first ever David Bowie painting I did at school, proper painting, in 1974. And
Wow.
I won the school art prize for this. It was the only thing I ever won at school. Bowie was responsible for me winning my only achievement at school, because I'd changed schools 12 times with
Yeah.
and I never learned anything. But this was my first ever Bowie painting, and I won the school prize for it. And it's kind of kickstarted what I'm still doing to this day.
I see the date on it, but I didn't register that this is actually from 1974. So wow,
Yeah,
yeah,
it painted in September 74.
yeah. So the real last question I'm going to ask you is this. So people have been watching this interview and they've been able to see your art and they've fallen in love with it and they want to. How do they get a Mark Wardel? Where could they either see an exhibit or more immediately, where could they purchase a piece of your art?
Okay. Well, I have a website, markwardel.com, but there isn't, that will redirect them. I have an online store called trashdna.com where I sell mostly, I sell the masks. With the masks, I only do them to order. So I take orders. So they can order masks if they want through trashdna.com. They can buy prints through trashdna.com, or they can message me through there if they want to commission a painting. Yeah, basically markwardel.com or trashdna.com.
Yeah, wonderful. Mark, I can't thank you enough. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I've really enjoyed talking with you. And as I've said, I've enjoyed your work for quite some time. So, any last thoughts?
No, I've just really enjoyed this as
Yeah.
well. Thank you so much. And I'm blown away that you already knew about my work and everything. It's always really nice, when you find out that people have liked your work without particularly knowing who you are or anything.
Yeah.
It tells you that it's out there. You've got a presence out there that people are relating to or resonating with. So thank you.
Wow, thank you. Mark Wardel, thank you very much. Let's stay in touch, and I look forward to your next project.
Thank you, John, and likewise. I'll keep watching your website and your channel.
Thank you.
Cheers.